Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Beyond the Home Study podcast. This is a podcast for parents, especially those who have welcomed children into their home through adoption or foster care or are considering one of those things. So we're glad you're here. I am so happy to be joined by Laura Noonan. She is my guest today. So, Laura, so thankful that you're here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. So, this is going to be kind of like a little two-part mini series, and I am solo hosting for the first time. Bear with me. I have not done this before. I miss Laura Rose being here to bounce things off of already. So, anyways, a two-part mini series on just like adoption 101. Laura and I actually started talking. We met each other through Beauty Counter when we both sold Beauty Counter products for a time. And we started talking, and she said, "Hey, I have all these questions about adoption. Can I send you a message? Can I ask you?" And I was like, "Hey, actually, what do you think about just getting on the podcast and seeing if we could just record your questions, kind of like flip the script, like you ask me some of those." So if you have considered adoption at all, you've probably been on Google, maybe ChatGPT, asking some different questions. So there certainly is, this will not be something that is like totally all inclusive. You have everything you need, but we're going to try to give you as much as we can, and just also from like more of a personal side. So, Laura, I know you've already done lots of research and we've talked a little bit already, but I think it will be fun for our listeners to just hear our conversation.
Yeah, I'm
So,
excited to get some answers.
yeah, definitely. So let's just get started with tell us about you, tell us about your family. I know something a little crazy happened in your life in the last week that you just shared with me. So share as much as you'd like.
Son just broke his leg falling down our stairs, reaching for a screw up on the wall. So we just got him in a boot. Thankfully, it's only going to be like a 5-week healing process. So, or
Okay.
4 week actually. Yeah, 4 weeks. So that's not too bad. I feel like that's doable.
Gosh, yeah.
But
Okay, so you have a
we
5-year-old
don't.
son, and tell us about the rest of your family too.
Yep. So we have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old boy, and then an 8-month-old boy. So we have three boys. And we live in Nashville, Tennessee. We've lived here for about 4 years, and we moved here actually from New Mexico. My husband and I have moved around quite a bit. And I'm a stay-at-home mom, which is something that I've just really come to love and appreciate. And on the side, I run a social media account supporting spouses of physicians, which is a huge passion of mine. And yeah, just now that we've have three kiddos, we have just, I would say probably for the last 2 years, have kicked around the idea of adoption and whether it was the right fit for us or not. And just about a month ago, my husband came to me and was like, you know what? I think I'm ready to adopt. What do you think? And so I quickly texted Abby and was like, we got to chat.
Okay, so take me back to like 2 years ago when you started thinking about adoption. I'm going to let you ask questions, but I want to ask a couple first. So, like 2 years
Yeah.
ago when you were thinking about it, were you thinking like you were done having biological children at that time? Were you thinking like, oh, this is just something I've always wanted to do? Like, where did kind of the initial idea come from?
Yeah, so for me, I was raised around a lot of families that had adopted. And then after college, I nannied for a family that had adopted four children. And so I've been around adoption a lot. And so in the back of my head, I've always kind of been like, yeah, I'm open to it, but like, we'll see.
Uh-huh.
So 2 years ago, we had our two oldest, and pregnancy is very, very hard for me. It is not something that like my body enjoys. And so we were really debating about whether or not it would be wise for me to get pregnant again. And so that kind of is what started the conversation. And at that point, my husband pretty, like, not open to it, and I would say I was more open to it. And so then we did decide to get pregnant again, but then just with how that labor and delivery went, we decided it was probably not on the table again to do it. We don't I remember, like, after our 3rd was born, I was like, "I just don't know if I feel done growing our family, though." Like, I just have
Mm,
never been able to get to that spot, and so, um, we recently moved to a home that gives us a little bit more space to grow, and my husband feels like, "Wow, I feel like we could add more to our house
yeah.
now." So that's kind of where all of this has kind of, like, come of, like, both of us wanting to be on the same page before we move forward with it, and now both of us feeling like we don't feel done growing our family, but at the same time, I think my body is done having babies, so what would be the next logical step, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good because I wondered if it was you or your husband who had kind of the initial thought and idea because we've talked before on this podcast that it feels like it's always the wife, like it's always the woman who like
Mhm.
brings it to the table. And so when you said that your husband was the one who mentioned it about a month ago, I thought, "Oh, interesting. Okay, this is like that's not usually the way it starts." But I mean, it definitely has been, of course. Like that's just a, kind of like a
Yeah,
similarity
I
we
feel like,
see.
a few years ago, it was me that was way more interested and he was
Yeah.
just not there. And it's kind of funny because a month ago when he mentioned it, I was like, out of 10, where like 10 being the most you really want to do it, where are you at? And he was like, at an 8 out of 10. And I was
Wow.
like, I think I'm at 6 out of 10. And I was like, he's like, why? And I was like, I don't know. I need to think about it a little bit more. I think
Yeah.
I've needed some questions answered. So yeah, that I kind of thought it was funny too, because everything I've heard is that usually it's the woman who is more like pursuant of it at
Yeah.
first. So
Yeah. So
yeah.
interesting. So interesting. Okay. So I know that you, like, we've chatted a little bit. So I know you've gotten the answers to some questions, but hopefully we can still, like, talk about those too.
Okay, great. This was
Yeah.
actually a question my husband wanted me to ask you. Was there anything you wish people would have told you before that you didn't hear before you adopted? And I would add to that, for me, that you wish people would have talked to you about regarding, like, bonding with your baby.
Yeah. That's good. So, yeah, thinking about this, I mean, the listeners of this podcast or who have, heard other episodes know like my sister was adopted. So I kind of saw like my parents walk through that process. So I knew a bit about what the process would look like. And like my mom has always been a great resource for me of questions and different things to ask. But the type of adoption that we ended up doing for our most recently for our twins was a private domestic adoption where my parents were uh, through an agency international. So like there's a lot of differences there. But I think for me, the thing that I wish I could have had more candid conversations with someone about was the relate how to build a relationship with the girl's birth mom and like what that would really look like because you can find a lot of answers online in different places of like what to do if you need therapy for your children when they're older, what to do when you're fundraising, like all these different like I don't know, more maybe like more black and white things. Like therapy can definitely be a nuanced thing. So there's a lot of different things that go into that. But at least like there's resources out there that you can go and find. Where thinking about like building a relationship with a birth mom, which to kind of even back up a little bit from there, most adoptions today are open adoptions. So that means you have open communication with a birth mom. Now, there can always be options for closed, whether it's your preference or hers to be closed. Um, but like, I didn't even really know where to start with that. And so I wish that I could have had someone who could speak a little bit more candidly with me about that. And we just did an episode. It's probably by the time this one comes out, it's probably like 2 or 3 back, all about like birth moms and how to talk to them and what the relationship can look like. And that I was like, that would have been so helpful for me to have something like that even just entering into the process because we had like a 7-month journey with her, waiting for her to have these babies. So, um, that's a huge one. And then I think for like the attachment side, I honestly think for me, because I knew that our goal was infant adoption, that like we would ideally be at the hospital when they were born, I didn't worry too much about attachment because I figured I'm all that they'll know. Like that would be the hope and the goal. And so I didn't worry too much about that. And I saw like my parents adopted my sister when she was 6. So she'd already like she remembers life in Ethiopia before coming here. And she was able to bond well with our family and kind of fold into our family really well. So yeah, I think because I figured we were adopting infants, I didn't think too much about it. Now, there are certainly cases where it's still really hard to bond with your infant, whether it's your biological infant or your adopted infant.
Yeah.
Um, so, there's a lot of just being with them, being close to them, even things like very practical things like skin to skin in the hospital. Like when I was there in the NICU with our girls, like trying to have time holding them and being close to them and them smelling me and knowing who I was and hearing my voice and all of that, like from day 2 of their life. So,
Yeah. That's interesting. So something kind of to dovetail off of that, another question would be,
yeah.
I feel like there's a lot out there now about like traumatic experiences in people's lives and how being separated at birth is an actual trauma.
Yes.
And is that something that like you have had to give a lot of thought to in the early stages, or is that something that usually like what exactly does that entail or does that mean for a child and for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I think because like speaking from my personal experience, our girls are still so young, we haven't seen the ramifications of what that could look like yet because they're very dependent on us for everything still. But even what the lifestyle that a birth mom can lead when she's pregnant and the choices that she makes, whether that's drugs or health and food options or just her personal health and like what her personal health status looks like all of that can definitely cause I think trauma in a child, stress, like all of those different things, like that causes trauma in a child even as they're growing as a tiny baby. So I don't think we've seen that yet, but I absolutely believe it's possible that that can take effect as time goes on. And the cool thing about like even Laura Rose, who is my co-host usually on this podcast, like she specializes in occupational therapy for adopted kids. So like there are so many resources in her and then in others like that that like I just don't even think people knew how to talk about that even like 10, 15 years ago. Like we didn't even acknowledge that that was a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
I don't know if that answers your question fully. I feel like I'm not the best one
I
to
feel like it
answer
does.
it.
No, yeah, I know that it's not there yet. And yeah, I feel like everybody has traumas just in different ways, you know? I mean, I was just thinking
Yeah.
about even my oldest, how stressed I was with his pregnancy because
Yeah.
of him being my first. And, like, I can see the impact on that in his life now, you know?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Well, and like the stress hormones that you have as a pregnant woman, like, and all the things that you're going through, like, that can manifest in a way that looks just like drugs and alcohol. Like, there's so many crazy things that impact your baby as your baby is growing inside of you, and I mean, I'm probably not the most, like, versed in all of that to speak on it, but I know that it absolutely impacts the growth and
sure.
development.
Yeah. So then another question would be, what's the hardest thing that you've faced in like pre-adoption, going through the stages and matching, and then post-adoption? So that might be a two-part question.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that one of the hardest things is the uncertainty of just the whole thing, like from start to finish, honestly. And it feels like, and I think this is what people don't understand who haven't walked this road, um, is that like, yes, you sign a contract. Yes, you pay a certain amount of money. Sometimes per month you're paying a certain amount of money. So like there's all these things that like in other spheres of life, like when you're buying a car or you're buying a house and you sign your contract and you commit what you're going to do, you like all these things, like you have more surety and like assurance in those things. Where in this, it's like there are like fail safes that can take place obviously in any contract. Like you can put those things or make sure that they're there. But at the end of the day, like it's a birth mom's choice to place her child for adoption. And just as you know, I'm sure from like other friends and other people, like pregnancy is not a sure thing. So like there are so many unknowns even just in a pregnancy, let alone in an adoption and a placement like that. So I think that is definitely one of the hardest things. And that's the hard thing to like describe to people and share, like when they say, how are things going, like are you getting so excited, like your twins are going to be born in a month, like all these different things. It's like, yeah, I hope that we will bring them home in a month, like just I don't know, things like that. Like that was hard to wrestle with, and it's like every month is like a new adventure. And you're like trying to figure out like, okay, like check, like we made it to 24 weeks, check, we made it to 20, like all those different things, but there's still so much unknown.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you had a second part of that question, I think. So that was like, I guess,
So what's the hardest post-adoption?
post adoption. um So we at this current moment, the girls are about 4 months old. So we're technically, the phase that we're in right now is um, a post placement investigation. So we have like legal rights over the girls. We have like medical, we can make medical decisions for them. They obviously live in our home. Um, all of those different things, but like they're technically not adopted yet. So we haven't had our um, court date to say like they are legally ours, we changed their last name to ours, like that kind of thing. So usually that, I mean, it's different for every state, but because we're in Ohio and they were born in California, we're working with two different states. So we have like two different agencies basically who are working with each other. um, and we still have like home study visits that are called post placement visits. So once a month, once we brought the girls home, once a month we've had a social worker come to meet us, visit, basically just look around and make sure that we're fit to parent. Um, and so, even in that, like, it's not necessarily hard, but there's more paperwork, there's more fees, there's more thinking through like all of those different things, making sure we get them to the right doctor's appointments so that we get the right medical forms filled out and like all of that. Um, so I don't know if I'd say it's hard, but it's a lot of work still to like do
Yeah.
all of that in preparation for what will hopefully be a court date in August.
Have you been working with the same social worker from since before the adoption through now?
So that was kind of like a weird thing with our situation, is because we moved and crossed state lines. So we started the process in Kentucky and then we moved to Ohio part of the way through. Actually, like a month and a half after we matched, we moved. So we had to do a new home study. And so we work with um, a different social worker who's coming to visit our house and everything now versus the one that we started with.
It's so crazy to me that this isn't like that the standards aren't nationwide. Like
It
you would
is.
think that we could, like it's wild.
Yeah. So, like, so now we've worked with 3 states. So, like, in Kentucky, this is just like a weird example, but in Kentucky, we had to go get FBI fingerprints. Like, that's part of the thing. You go and, like, we went to a UPS store. We scanned our fingers on this thing because UPS stores do FBI fingerprinting. So that was in
Or
Kentucky. Then when we got to Ohio, we went to like a private um, fingerprinting. I don't even know technically what they're called, but like it was a different type of fingerprint that we needed, like a different system that did this. And like FBI, like federal, like you're not going to find any different results in Kentucky than you did in Ohio. And then in California, because we're not there in person, they sent us these cards that we had to buy a stamp pad and put our own fingerprints on and then mail them back. So it's like those are just like that's 3 different states, 3 totally different ways of gathering fingerprints.
yeah,
It's
that
wild.
is why, and they're FBI, all FBI, even the California one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like because it covers, like, FBI, and then you've got, like, with state, like, in Ohio, it's, like, BCI or something, and then in California, I don't know, it's FBI and whatever their state one is called.
Hmm.
So, it's crazy.
Interesting. Yeah.
But I've said it multiple times, I'm like, "Can you just get that from the last one? Like, what's the deal?" So, like, obviously, you're not planning to move state lines anytime soon, I don't assume, but you may have, like, because you said you've lived in New Mexico and you've lived other places, like, there could be, like, nuances to your case that someone else may not have the exact same things because you have a different form you have to fill out. You have to get a background check from the last however many states you've lived in, like all those things. So there really is just like there's no 2 cases that look the same.
Interesting. Another question really quick off the cuff of like
Yeah.
something that I've been this is something that I had a conversation with a friend 2 years ago, who had adopted, and I was kind of telling her that we had been tossed around the idea, and her response was that she didn't feel like if you could have your own children that you should necessarily be
Mm,
considering adoption, and I'm curious like what your response to that is.
yeah.
Like, is that like a pretty common sentiment that you have found with families that adopt or?
Honestly, I mean, I know people who've adopted in every case. Some have, um, you know, gone through fertility treatments and had little to no success, and so they moved to adoption as their next option. Like, that's pretty much what our story is. I know of, like, my own family. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, and my youngest sister is adopted. So my parents had 5 biological children when they adopted my sister. So, and I know of other families too that like kind of fall on both sides of that. I think that there is a sentiment maybe for some birth moms who will look at a family and see like, oh, they already have a lot of kids, a lot, quote unquote, of kids. Like, I don't want to choose them because I don't want my child to get forgotten, left out, whatever. That's what our birth mom had actually shared with us when she was looking to place her twins. She was really looking for someone who did not have children already because she said, twins are going to be a lot. Like, I want to make sure that they're well taken care of, all these different things. And she saw the way that we interacted with our son and loved our son and was like, oh, they'll be fine. Like, those are like basically the words that she used. So, but I also think, like, it shouldn't be a reason to steer people away because a birth mom is going to make her choice. Like, there may be some that say, like, I am having a boy and I really want him to be in a family of all boys. Perfect. Like, that's your family. Like, there's no there's no formula, of like how it's going to
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. That
Yeah,
makes
but I
sense.
think also some people just say things without really thinking about them too. I'm sure that you have encountered that, and if you haven't, then you will around this topic where there's a lot of people who it's like they just don't really think through the whole picture before they say something.
Yeah. Okay, so another question, and this is like probably so far what has been the hardest thing for me as I'm doing research is how to pick out the route that you're going to go with an adoption, whether you should use an agency or you should use a lawyer because we have been connected with a lawyer that's out of Louisiana that gets like rave reviews.
Mhm.
And they are just solely an adoption lawyer. And people say, well, they're a lot more affordable than utilizing an agency. So I'm curious what your thoughts are between the two models,
Mhm.
and like how to like decide which route to go.
Yeah, I mean, there there's so many different ways because even within agencies, there's like Christian agencies or like, religious agencies of some sort. There's more public agencies, and then there's going like extremely private with a lawyer like that. And I think that so in our experience, we looked at one of the larger adoption agencies and they said your estimated wait time is 3 years. And we said, that's just not what we envisioned because we already at that point had a 2.5-year-old and we weren't looking to wait another 3 years. And that was just 3 years to basically get to the top of the list. And it wasn't like 3 years and your baby will be born, like, which not that anybody can even really guarantee that, but it just showed that to me, what it showed was that agency had a lot of interested adoptive parents, but not a lot of connections with birth moms. And so I think that's where I would say, like, looking at these different models, an attorney, like a private attorney, an adoption lawyer, may be a great route to go, but may only get like may only have 5 birth moms per year that come to them, and they already have 50 people on their wait list, or however it works. Like, I don't know how every single one would work. Um, and it might be totally opposite. It might be like he or she is saying, like, I need more families because I have all these different birth moms who are coming to me. So I think like those are some good questions to ask of like, what does, if that's of concern to you, and like if that's something you're thinking about, is like wanting to have a quicker timeline than a few years, which I feel like when you get to this point of like you're doing the research, you're doing the paperwork, you're doing all these things, like your desire is a year and a half that you would have a child placed in your home. Um, and if it's longer than that, then you may be able to wait longer, or go with someone who, like a larger agency that um, is able to kind of like, yeah, just have like a longer timeline. Um, but so what's interesting about the agency that we used called Adoption Assistance, which I know I had already sent you some of this, but what's interesting, and I was like reflecting back on this when you were asking me, is that they would partner, like they would send cases. So they called that, you would get like, I think they were called scenarios maybe or something like that. But you would like get an email that said like case or scenario number 269, whatever it was. And there were some times where that was an agency. Like it was, you would see like agency paperwork. So like there might be an adoption agency in Louisiana that like they're not finding anyone within their sphere who will adopt this child. So they send it kind of to like the broader list. And so you would see some of those, or like in our case, we were matched with a private attorney. And, it's primarily what he does is to facilitate adoptions. Um, so yeah, it's interesting too, like with the fees. I'm so curious, like I want to know more about the attorney in Louisiana, because one of the things I thought about with us, like one of our fees was kind of like, what'd they call it? Like a marketing fee almost, which was basically the fee that was paid to the attorney because like he markets quote unquote with this agency. So like they have
Yeah.
like a cooperation, right? Like that's how they're able to keep doing this. Um, and again, like in some states, you've probably seen this in some of your research, like different states have different rules around this. Like I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I think the last time I looked, Florida was a state that you could not work with just an attorney. You had to have an agency that you went through. So,
Huh.
like, there could be cases like that too. I don't know all of the laws around it. All I know is that they're all different.
I just looked it up. The agency down in Louisiana, it's not an agency, sorry. The lawyers that are known, like that I've heard from multiple different people about, they're called Odom Soska Adoptions, and it's like a mother daughter duo. Anyway, and I
Nice.
talked to a gal like 2 weeks ago who they've adopted through her, and then they have friends who adopted through this like group. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So cool.
so if anybody is looking for a lawyer, but
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
they
that's good.
do adopt in Louisiana too.
Yeah, I think like, and I honestly feel like I'm still processing this a lot, like from our own experience. The thing that I think I like more about like a traditional agency is that there are more resources for not only for you as like an adoptive parent because they're there to help you like a lot, you know, kind of like help you along the way, but they also have resources to offer to the birth moms. And like that's something that I just didn't like, kind of back to your very first question, like I didn't really think too much about like what will like counseling and therapy look like for our birth mom should she choose to do that. And so we asked our attorney at one point and he said like you can pay privately for that, like that would be like above and beyond, you know, what you have already paid, like that would be up to you to work that out with her. Or if you, he said like if you want me to facilitate it, I can, and I can pay a therapist or whatever it might be. And so we gave that to her as an option and said like we would love for you to pursue this if it's something that you need, whether it's today or down the road. Where I think like some of these larger agencies, they have that like kind of built in already, which again, I don't know like what the standards are and like what that all really looks like, but I think it is something to consider of like, okay, once like the final check is paid or like final documents are signed, like, is there any support for a birth mom or birth father or birth family or you know whatever that might look like. um and yeah, I just think that's like something interesting to consider that I don't even feel like I've fully processed that.
Okay, so then another question would be, how do you
Hmm.
pick an agency, and do you have a
Hmm.
recommendation list of recommendations? Because, man, anytime I like start Googling it, I literally almost have to shut my computer because it sometimes feels like some of them are so sketchy. I mean, I'm kind of like, is this real or is this a scam? Or like you
Yeah,
can't even find information about their timelines or anything, and I'm like, how do you know who to go with?
I know. I think like what you had said earlier of like you know multiple people who've worked with this lawyer, like I really think you have to go by word of mouth and like recommendations from your community because, and even with that, like obviously sketchy stuff can still happen. Like we talked with one of my friends who's an adoptive mom who was adopting from the Congo, and it took like 4 years. They were matched with like four different children across those 4 years. Her story is crazy, but it turned out like it was hard to work with this agency, but they had known people who had had success and like, yeah, just kind of crazy stuff. But I think like domestically, thankfully, like there are laws, there are regulations on all of these different things. So for the most part, you know, any attorney, any agency is going to ultimately be held to a high set of standards because in they're working through government agencies and the home studies and all the different things. Like there's all these checks and balances. So I think like a few agencies that I've heard really good things about are, well, Nightlight is actually who we adopted our embryos from, or through. And so Nightlight was the one that had a really long wait time, though, at the time that we were looking. Doesn't mean that it's different now, but they're a great agency and like they offer so much support and resource, which I love about them. Um, FAC is one that I've heard a lot about, Faithful Adoption Consultants, I think, and they kind of work with uh like all different agencies. Like they're kind of like the connector. So like you would give your information to them and then they're looking at like all of these different agencies to like connect you to. So I think they have like a pretty wide network, which is nice, and they're faith-based, which I think if that's important to you, that's a good way to go. Um, and then so we worked with adoption assistants in Kentucky, which I think they're only I looked to see if they work in Tennessee, and they do. So I think it's like Tennessee and Kentucky, maybe the only two. They may have branched into like Indiana at some point, but they're I mean they're one that they're they're not faith-based in any way, but they just it's kind of like how you had actually talked about the attorney of like a mother daughter. Like this is it's an adoptive mom who started the agency because she wanted to help other adoptive families. So, and like a lot of people on their staff have adopted. So I liked that about them is that like they just seemed really relatable, um, and were like what we needed at the time, like kind of bare bones in a way, but not in like a weird sketchy way. Like they just didn't have a whole lot of extra fluff.
Yeah. What was their wait time like on average whenever you guys decided to go forward with them?
Um, I think they said 12 to 18 months total, but then they had said so we had friends who had worked with them, two different families that had worked with them. One was actually a military family who was stationed in Germany and was adopting from California, and like they helped to facilitate so much of that. So even just that was like, okay, this is like they have resources to like help with all these different things and know what's going on. Um, but what helped me choose them was that they said that they are in contact with like hundreds of birth moms and hundreds of cases every single year. And so I liked that because I knew it wasn't just going to be like we see one case a month, which there are some agencies that you're only seeing one case a month, but then there's like 25 families who are interested in one case. Like, how you can't even like put a wait time on that, like there's no way to come up with that. So I liked that I saw like they had hundreds of cases. Now some were sibling groups, some were older kids, like there were a lot of different, it wasn't just like 300 infants to adopt, like there was a wide variety of cases, but I liked that there was that variety.
Okay. Did
Hmm.
you guys use one agency and then just go with them, or did you apply to a couple different agencies to kind of see
Yeah,
which one would work out?
we decided just to go forward with adoption assistance, and we started with them in February. Um, I think our paperwork was done. Like, I think our home study was approved in June, maybe, or July, which some of that was just like us kind of dragging our feet on a variety of different things that had to be done. And my sister lived with us at the time, so we had like another set of fingerprints and like all the background checks and information to get from her. Um, so that process took a few months, and then we were matched in September. So, like, I imagine that if we had gone like a year and we weren't seeing the cases that we thought like would be relevant to us, we would have looked at other agencies. I had a couple others on my list that were specific to Kentucky that I was looking at. Um, but we didn't even, I mean, it went pretty quick, so we didn't even really need to consider other agencies. But people have definitely done that. And sometimes sometimes I think that's helpful, especially if you're not seeing cases from your agency that you choose, you can apply to others.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think where we're at least, yeah, I was talking to my husband and I was like, it has just felt really overwhelming to look at all these agencies.
Yes.
And I told him, I said, this is what we're gonna do. Because he's kind of like relying on me to like find out all the
Yeah, yeah.
information. Like, we're just gonna go with an agency that we know someone else has adopted from and had a really good success story, like that they were happy with it, and
Yes.
then we're just gonna commit to it and just move forward with it as long as like the wait times aren't like excessively long with whatever
Yeah.
like kind of them for all of that, but then just going forward with one that we know someone who has utilized. So it's good to
Yeah.
hear your confirmation of kind of like, yeah, all of that.
Yeah,
And
I
it,
mean, that's basically what we did, is that we
yeah,
I said, "Okay, I'm gonna write down," and I shared a spreadsheet with you, which I can share with anyone who wants to see it, but I was like, "All right, I'm gonna put, like, 5 different agencies on here." I did, like, either information calls with them or, like, requested packets of information from them, reviewed all of it, and then kinda just, like, put a date on it and said, like, "Okay," I don't remember what it was, but, like, "By the end of the month, we're just gonna choose one of these and move forward." And like a lot of them have like 50 to $100 application fees. Like it's not so much that you can't do more than one. Or if you do decide to go with one and you're like a month in, you're like, I don't like their system or like the way that they gather information, or they're telling me they're losing things, or like I don't know, just like there's so much paperwork that it's like that's part of it is you want to find someone who is trustworthy.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so adoption assistance, because honestly, that's the one that we are like currently. I'm inclined to go with just based off of what you've said, and like because we live in Tennessee, it's really close. It would be. It just seems really easy.
Yeah.
So, what the like breakdown go of like timeline, and then
Mhm.
what costs are associated with that timeline?
Okay. So I'm going off memory right now, but I should probably
Yep, that's
look at
okay.
it. But here's a rough estimate. So, okay, for us, we started the process in February. So we apply. They, we may have had an informational phone call with them just to like talk through a couple of things. You pay your application fee, which I think for them is like 75-ish dollars. You have your application fee, and then they give you like, here are your first 8 documents to gather: your marriage license, birth certificates, um, a few things like that, that like if you don't have those things or don't have the right copies or certified copies or things like that, can take a little bit longer. Okay, so that's like they'll give you kind of steps like, okay, here's your first 8 documents, and then they'll schedule your first home visit. So someone will actually come into your home, they look through your home, they're making sure you have the space that you need, that you have secure locks on your doors, that your medication is locked, all the different things like that. And there's like a whole long list. If you need to go through like what do I need to do before a home study like that or a home visit? So I'd say like some of that is like based on your timing of like how quickly you get the paperwork together and all that. Um, and so there is a fee. So you've got like your application fee. Usually you'll have some fees on the background checks and fingerprints and things like that. It's like 50 to $100 for each of those. And I think adoption assistance, if I'm not mistaken, they had that broken down. So you could kind of like get a rough estimate of what that was. I'd say for us, it was probably $1,000 or so based on that. And then your actual like you pay a home study fee, so you're like paying adoption assistants to put it all together for you. So they're going to gather all this information, write up a narrative for you and everything. And so that fee is, I think in Kentucky it was 2,000 for that. So you're, at this point you're like a few thousand in. And then once you do all that, you're really just waiting to match with a birth mom. And those fees can vary. I mean, I saw cases that came in, as low as like 10,000. Um, all in because they were someone local who adoption assistance was actually working with privately. They were already 7, 8 months pregnant, so they didn't need living expenses for their whole pregnancy. So the costs for that were low, like 10, I'd say like 10 to 15,000 on the low end. Then when you get into like working with other states and if the birth mom is really early in her pregnancy, then you have living expenses that you pay for her each month, and each state has a cap of that. So again, every state is different. So in California, the cap is, I believe, 2,500. So like that's what we did is every month we would send $2,500 to our attorney who would distribute that to our birth mom. And I think I would say that's probably pretty average. Like, I definitely saw some that were like $800 a month. I mean, honestly, in this world, like, how do you live off of $800 a month? Like, I mean, there's just, especially when you need, food, you need probably maternity clothes, like all these different things and they'll detail all of that out. Like, they're required by law to do that. So you can always ask for that too if you feel like, ooh, this is a lot. Like, they have to prove what their money is going towards, um, or at least like give you categories. So yeah, so that like so for some of these cases, like I would see like upwards of 60, 70, 80,000. And when we initially started this whole process, we were like, I think we had wanted to stay around 45. Like that was pretty much our goal, was to stay as close as we could to 45,000. We had goals of fundraising for that. We had saved so we could fund this, like all of that. Um, and all in, ours was a lot more than that. And some people ask us if it was a lot more because we adopted twins, and it doesn't really work like that. Like, you don't actually pay more for more children. There are a couple of things that like you you pay, like if there's a $500 fee for filing some document that you need to file, you pay that twice because there's two files that you're submitting. So there's some things like that, but that's all like on the attorney side. So he would figure that out and let us know if there was going to be a duplicate cost. So yeah, but all that to say, so cost and everything, and you didn't ask this question, but I'll share the information with you anyways. One of the reasons that One of the things that caught our eye in our case that we looked at when we looked at the twins was that we were aware of a child tax credit, an adoption child tax credit, that, if you fall within a certain income bracket range, you're eligible for. And again, we're like hoping, praying that all of this stays, but we don't know. Every year, these things are voted on, and, things may change depending on what goes down, from a government perspective. So we don't know exactly what it will look like. But one of the things that caught our eye was that because we were adopting twins, we would get two tax credits. And in 2024, the tax credit was around 17,000. So knowing that we would get hopefully double that back when we would get our tax credit, which will be for the year 2025, since that's when our adoption will be finalized. So we won't see that realized until 2026. But that's our hope and goal. So that's why we were okay going up a little bit of a higher budget number when we
Okay.
first saw the case. So that's like a long way of saying that's something to consider when you're looking at this. And obviously, like, it's great to talk with like your financial advisor, accountant, or someone to say, like, is this something that we are eligible for? Does that work in the state of Tennessee? Like, I mean, there's so many different nuances to it, but it is kind of nice to know that that's a possibility.
Huh. Okay, so I have a couple more questions. Is okay, so you go through all the paperwork and then and then you get to the point. I'll do this question first. You get to the point where you're like filling out the paperwork, saying yes or no to like different scenarios before you're even
Yes.
presented to them. Like, how did you guys go through that paperwork? And like, if you
Mm-hmm.
feel comfortable, what were
Oh,
things
yeah.
that you were? okay with? And like, how did you determine that?
Yeah. So this is going to be different for your family that to my family to the next person's family because we all have different capacities. We all have different, communities and upbringings and views and everything. So we had decided like we were very, very open to gender, race, everything. Our primary goal was infant because we really wanted to have a baby again. So that was age was like probably the thing that we looked at most. But I will say like even as you're reviewing the cases, you're looking to see typically you're seeing what the birth mom you know claims as her race is like that's how you're seeing it. And then birth father, if he is known, then and if he has filled out the paperwork, then like what his race is. And so, but there are sometimes where that's unknown. There are sometimes where, you know, you check one box and you don't give like your full description. And so you're going off of, just what is on this piece of paper. So there's a lot that is to me is still unknown all the way throughout. But I think like what most, most people are thinking about with that is like, do I want to bring a child into my home that doesn't look anything like me or in your case my kids and their siblings? And I think that's something to wrestle with and like really think about of like what does that look like for a family? And I think the way I would say, obviously, like, be prayerful about it and, like, very thoughtful about it, but also think about, like, what does your community look like? And, like, where would this child go to school, and what does that school look like? And really thinking about, like, if you were to adopt a transracial child, do they have community? Do you have community of, like, a mom that you can go to and say like, "Hey, I need help with this." I think that is something that's probably not talked about enough. And I'm definitely not one who I'm sitting here as a white woman, like I'm not someone who even has all the answers about that, but I do think it's like it's something to really consider and really think about because it will make a huge difference in that child's life.
Yeah. I remember we were chatting, and one of the things I was talking to you about was kind of some of our particulars of what we are like looking for in
Mhm.
adoption. As far as like we have three boys, so we would love to add a girl to our family, and like all of these different. And I remember you saying something about like you had some pointers on like what to put on your application, even though like we
Yeah.
might have particular. Do you remember that? And if so, could you like refresh me on like what you were
Yeah,
talking about?
yeah. So I think if I'm remembering it right, I think what I was saying is like you want to remain a little bit more open on your initial like paperwork and what you're looking for, just so that you can see the options that are the cases, that are coming to you. So like if you do go with adoption
Okay.
assistance, like I think it would probably be beneficial for you to see all of the different cases that are coming through because here's the thing too is that and like this would be something like if you're open to it or not, you may have a birth mom who is 15 weeks along, 20 weeks along, but doesn't have any prenatal care and hasn't actually found out what the gender of this child is yet. But like everything else matches up. Like these are all the things that you like really are looking for. She's the age that you're thinking would be great to like continue a relationship with and like all these different things, right? Like there could be a whole list of scenarios, but like she doesn't know if she's having a boy or a girl yet. And so like is that something that you're open to, interested in? And obviously you can always request information like that, but it may or may not be readily available. So I don't know. That's why I think I say like just remain a little bit more open because you don't know what will present itself to you. Um, but I do remember telling you, and I said this another time, and I just keep thinking about it because I think it's like good for me, even just in other things in life of like when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And so you just have to like at the end of the day, you have to make a decision, prayerful, thoughtful decision, all of that. But like just knowing that, like, yeah, when you say yes to a 3-month-old little girl to come into your home, you've said no to the infant boy who may come up next. Like, there's just always going to be both sides of the coin.
So then you do all that paperwork and then you start getting matches. What does that look like? It's like,
Mhm.
what does it look like when you matches? How often do you get them? How many do you start getting? Like, unless maybe we could talk just about like what your experience was with adoption assistance.
Yeah, so adoption assistants, they send all their cases through email. So my recommendation is create an email address that is only going to be used for this purpose. So like ours was like ramirezfamilyadoption@gmail.com or something
Okay.
along those lines. Because then like you and your husband have it on your phone and you're like watching as these come in, right? And so when we started, so we were like halfway through the year and we started seeing cases that were coming in at like, case number 100, case number 102, like, and they come in, you know, chronological order all the way through. And so the the very stressful part of this is they will often say, like, it'll be Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. and they send this email through and they'll say they need responses by Thursday at noon. So like you have like one opportunity to talk to your husband who's at work all day about this case. Because you're seeing it and you're like looking to see what information is there. And like sometimes it will say, like, here's birth mom's location, maybe age. She's expecting a boy. She's 9 weeks along. And the total cost is 50,000. And like that's all the information that you see. That's everything.
Oh,
And so I would get like really stressed out about that because I would think, I need more. Like, I want to see medical records. I want to see like like, is this her only child? Has she had other children? Like, I mean, I just like had a million different questions, and often you don't get that. But what the process looks like is if you see something that you are interested in and that matches like what your specifications are, you reply with your name. So we would just reply and say like Josh and Abbey Ramirez interested in this case. And then the moderator, of the messages would take your name and pass it on to whether it's the agency or the attorney or whoever it might be. And you at this point have already made a profile book, which is something we didn't even touch on at all, which we could talk about another time. Um,
yeah.
but you've already made a profile book. And so your profile is then presented to that birth mom. And so then you just wait and see if she even looks at your profile, or what it might be. But here's the thing is that there are times when and this happened to us once or twice, where we presented and we didn't hear anything back for like a week, 2 weeks. So I thought like, well, we shouldn't put in for any other cases because what if that one comes back? And adoption assistants, they kind of coached us through it and they were like, no, you can continue to put your name in and you just describe the situation. If you've already committed to another birth mom, then they'll move on to the next person. Usually an attorney or an agency will have like 2 or 3 families
Okay.
that they're presenting. So that kind of made me feel like I was like, I wish somebody would have told me that before because it takes a little bit of that pressure off. Like I felt like when we put our name in, it was like we were signing a $50,000 check. Like that was what was happening like right there. And it's like, no, you're just saying like they're asking for someone, you're expressing interest and nothing is signed, like nothing is sure yet.
Okay.
So that kind of like takes a little bit of the pressure off of like if you see a case come through that you're like, I think maybe we would be interested in this, like just put your name in and just see, see where it goes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So how many cases a week on average would you say you saw?
Yeah, you asked that. I'd say average like 3 to 5 cases per week.
Whoa.
A lot.
Okay. That's way more than I was expecting.
Yeah, it's a lot. I could probably look back. I have a spreadsheet that I will not share with you because it's all like private information, but I could at least give you numbers of like how many cases they saw come in a year, which they could give you that information too. But you can look at that or like I could look at that and see how many cases came through in a year. And I feel like the average was like 250 to 300.
Way more than a lot of the agencies I've been looking at. So
Yeah. Yeah. They're definitely like a big connector of all these different contexts. I don't
yeah,
even know
which is
how
funny.
it all really
Their
works.
website does not look like that, if I'm being honest. Their website doesn't look super sparkly or like,
I
polished.
know. Well, that's why I said like they were kind of the like no fluff option, which I kind of liked that. Like that's not for everybody, that's definitely not for everyone, but I kind of liked it.
Yeah, no, like I trust it because it's you guys have gone through it. But yeah, when I looked, I was
Yeah.
like, at first I was like, "Wait, is this the right website?" And I think I like clicked that. But yeah, and that's
Yeah,
why
you're
I
like, wait
texted
a
you,
second.
Kentucky. Yeah,
I know.
but that's
I know. And there
that's a
are things,
lot.
yeah, and like there definitely are things that they do that like a lot of things had to be like filled out by hand and like delivered or sent to their office where like I live in such a digital world that I'm like, can you docu-sign this stuff? Like can you just do this like some other like high-tech way? But they just were very like traditional in a lot of the things that they did and a lot of the ways they worked. But it was fine. Like it worked for them and it worked for us. So it was good.
Are there Okay, so last question because you mentioned it, and I was like, I need to ask it. Is what is this book that you're telling me about?
Oh, okay. Yes. So this was something I thought about talking about in the next episode, um, because I didn't know if we would get to it, but I'll kind of tease it now. So you create a family profile book, and I'm more than happy to share mine. I probably even have it in like a Canva template that I could give you and you can make your own. But so Adoption Assistance does a good job of like telling you, like giving you an outline, like show what your home looks like, show if you have children, if you have pets, show like what you like to do on the weekends, what do you do for fun, what are some like core family memories you've made, like things like that. And so, you just kind of go through, oh, and you want to show like your extended families too. So, like, who will this child spend holidays with? And like, things like that, like questions like that, that you I like to think about it from like the birth mom's perspective of like when she looks at this, what what does she feel when she looks at it? Like, is she excited
Yeah,
to see it? Like, does it look like inviting to her? All those different things. Um, and then you include a note to the birth mom, which was like oddly kind of emotional for me to even write because I was like just thinking about the whole process. It can be very emotional, but like just write a little note to her at the beginning, sign your names, and then include like pictures. And then I just did like little short captions, of like just little things. And so then you give it to adoption assistants as like a printed book and also as a digital. And so my assumption is it's usually sent digitally to most, interested birth moms just because like the turnover time or like not turnover, the time is like quick of like she's reviewing these tomorrow. So I'm sure they're emailed a lot. So like making sure it's set up like to look nice as a PDF too. Um, but yeah, it's just showing who your family is and why you would be a good
yeah,
choice for her.
yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Well, that's really
So I'm
helpful.
happy to show it to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to see it.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, and like that's kind of, that's just like one of those steps of like you can be looking at cases, but like you have to have all of that stuff done beforehand so that like when you see that case come through, you're like ready to send it all off. And like on the financial front too, you know, they definitely do recommend like having all of your finances in order and like you're ready to submit payment, you know, as soon as you're matched, which there's all different ways that that can work too. Like usually you're not paying a lump sum, right? Like I told you we paid like 2,500 a month. But those are like the things that you have to have in line and ready to go before you can even submit to and be presented with a case. It's a lot of like behind the scenes stuff that has to happen, and then I feel like when you have all that together, it moves probably quicker than you'll think it will move.
Yeah. Okay. So
At least
one last thing.
that was our
Oh
experience.
yeah. Go. So from the
Yeah,
start of
quick,
you starting paperwork to the girls coming home, how long was that for you guys?
just a little over a year.
Okay. So pretty quick.
Yeah, so 1 year, kind of wild. I know.
Yeah.
And I think, honestly, I think if you keep yourself in check and organized, it can go faster for you, which is pretty crazy.
That is crazy. I'm like, well, I don't know if I really
Yeah.
wanted to go faster at this point yet, but yeah,
I know. Well, you have an 8-month-old, so that's a lot. But
we're waiting until he's a little bit older, but we wanted to start the process of
yeah.
thinking,
Well, this was
yeah, that's
fun.
a
Thank
lot.
you for asking so many good questions. I hope that I was helpful and able to provide some information. Good. Well, I'm here with any questions that you have. And if you're open and willing, we'd love to follow this journey along with you and just see, you know, when you decide to move forward and how it all goes for you.
Yeah,
We'll check back in with you at some point.
that sounds great.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Laura. And thank you, everyone who listened. Thank you for tuning in to the Beyond the Home Study podcast. We'll see you again next time.